Good morning.
What time is it over there?
It is 7:30 in the morning.
Wow.
Oh, it's really early for you. It's actually, I said good morning, but it's actually good afternoon from us because
Yes.
it's 1:30 in the afternoon. But would you like to introduce yourself?
You bet. My name is Monty Wyatt, and I am an executive coach. And for the last 22 years, I've been helping CEOs, business owners, and executive teams bring clarity to how they lead and manage their organizations. And I help with strategy creation, strategy implementation and execution, and leadership development. And it has been a wild ride for 22 years. I just love helping organizations and individuals see how small changes to their thinking and their behavior can make such a huge difference on their results.
So what led
Amazing.
you to do that?
Well, I spent 14 years in corporate world. I was in the agricultural chemical industry and had roles in sales, sales training, sales management, marketing management. Survived 3 mergers and about 6 different moves. And after the last merger, the organization just really wasn't the leadership caliber that I really wanted. They didn't have good communication, didn't have good direction, just no energy. And I really wanted to help organizations be greater leaders and managers for people and to get great results. So after 14 years in the corporate setting, I set out in my own journey of helping organizations.
Amazing. Wow. Sounds like a rather thrilling ride, to be honest. And you get to deal with different organizations all the time, I imagine.
Yeah, I've had clients that are a couple million in sales to a couple billion in revenue. It's all about who the leader is and how they think and how they want to grow the organization. And that's really what it's about, how their mindset is. And it's about growth of themselves, because I truly believe that the ceiling of an organization is the leadership team and the leader of the organization. And when that person grows, the organization grows. And so that's my whole focus, is to help the leaders and managers of organizations think differently, act differently, and get different results.
It's funny, isn't it? Because not everybody in their business wants to grow their business, do they? They're quite happy where it is. How do you kind of come to terms with that in relation to your work?
Well, I'll even say it slightly differently. I think you get to a certain level in your career. Many people get to a certain level in their career and they believe they know it all. They believe they've learned everything they need to learn. They continue the way they've been doing it, and they don't need to grow anymore, themselves personally or their team. And that becomes the ceiling of the organization. Everybody wants more out of their organization, but they don't know what it means for their personal growth. And so that's been my focus, is in order to grow an organization, you have to grow the people and to think differently, to act differently, to interact differently, to communicate differently.
But
And
also the other side of that is the people have got to be willing to do that, don't they?
yes, they do. They have to be willing to change behaviors, change how they communicate, change how they build relationships. And that's very hard for a human being to change things. But once you put your mind to it and you understand what the impact is and see the impact, then that really becomes the power of growth.
So what's your kind of process then? How do you help people, and what sort of things do you actually do? Because by the sounds of it, it's all about the people. So how do you encourage them to do all of those things?
Well, it is all about the people, but I always start with what I call an alignment. And an alignment is getting aligned on how we think and what we're going after, what we're working towards. So we've all got to be on the same page of what we want success to look like, what our goals for the business, goals for the team, direction of the organization, how we're going to work together, our culture. Those kind of things have to be aligned before we can see what the opportunity is. And so once we're aligned, then we recognize, what do we have to do differently? What do we have to behave differently at? What do we have to think differently at to get different results? So we set our objectives, and then we think about, how do I have to change? How do I have to work differently, think differently, treat my team differently to get those results? And I'm working with a client right now that it's a family-run business. There's a mother and a father and a daughter and a son, and then a number of other people in the business. And they've never really set goals before. And so they've just been kind of cruising along and letting the business happen. And now that they've set goals, now that we've gotten clarity on what we want the future to look like and how we want the business to run, everybody has to think differently. Everybody has to grow in order to get those results. And so without that alignment, without that goal setting, without that creation of what the future is going to look like, we don't have that energy. We don't have that inspiration to even want to change.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And that kind of journey, how long can that journey take? I imagine it depends a little bit on the goal and you know, if you're going from a $1 million a year, say, you know, business to your goal is $1 billion, then clearly it's going to take a lot longer. But, you know, what's your kind of usual timescale that you work with your clients on?
You know, it's very interesting. It is about what the organization wants to achieve, and it's always about going to the next level. I've got clients that have been with me 10 and 12 years because we keep growing to the next level. We keep growing the team. We keep getting new revenue. We keep getting new geography, new markets. And so the value is still there because we're continuing to grow the team, grow the business, and we always have the next level that we want to go to. I also have people that stay with me for 12 months and they get what they need and they're ready to handle it on their own. But I really work as a facilitator. I facilitate the process so the CEO, the business owner, the executive team can actively participate in the conversations. So I facilitate so they don't have to worry about where are we going next? How's the conversation going? I lead the conversation. I facilitate it. I guide it. I make sure that we're making the right decisions at the right time. And that helps them be fully engaged in the conversations.
It is an interesting position though, isn't it? Because I am just sat here thinking about my own business and trying to get people to engage in professional development and personal development sometimes can be quite challenging. And I'm a great believer: read, listen, go to trainings, do whatever you can. You should never be kind of sedentary in what you're doing. You're forever evolving, and I think when you ever evolve, you become better at what you do, and you can encompass more, you can take on more, you can do more. It's just, but people don't seem to have the same enthusiasm that I have, and I find it very frustrating.
You know, it is interesting that we can all learn new things. We can listen to the podcast, we can read the books, but it's about implementation and putting it into practice. And so everybody can read something, but then the book still sits there on the shelf. That's one of my biggest roles is not only educating, but is how do we make this topic or this concept work in our business? And what do we have to do differently to make it impactful? You know, there's millions of business concepts and millions of business books, and everybody has their little twist on it. I help my clients think through how the concept will work in their organization and what they have to do, and get them to learn, get them to think, and get them to challenge themselves on what does this really mean for us, instead of taking that, the intellectual topic and hoping that it's going to work for us. We have to think it through. What is the behavior change? What is the process change that we have to go through as an organization to get different results?
And I suppose that part of that is that what value does that bring to the party, if you see what I'm saying? What you're reading a book, what have you gained from that you can then relate to your goals and your aspirations for the company, whatever that is. Because very often, I completely agree with you, people read a book, goes on the shelf, and they say, oh yeah, I've read that book. But actually, what have you taken from that book and changed it into real life circumstances is so important. And I read books over and over again, so because I just think there's a value in doing that. Because actually, if it's a book that's giving you a little bit of a sparkle, then the chances are then you are going to improve it just improves your life. I've got a list of books that I read that I go back to and keep going back to and keep going back to, and then add other books in there just to kind of educate myself. And then
Absolutely.
And then educate other people by letting them know where I read that book and what it came from, and this is what they suggested. But very often people don't do that. They don't follow it up, do they?
Yeah, and that's what I see as a huge value. Is I read a lot of books, I listen to a lot of things, and I break it down to make it simple. And as I said, I bring clarity. And you can read a 400-page book and not sure what to implement. my goal is I take the knowledge from the business world and make it simple, make it clear so it can be implemented. And the best facts of how do we make it work, what do we have to think differently at, how do we make different decisions? That's the funnest part for me, is getting people to see how small changes. It doesn't have to be a huge change. It's small changes.
Yeah, before we started recording today, I had a meeting with somebody and we were just talking about that very vital part. It might be something tiny, 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 but that can make the difference between a positive culture within an organisation and a negative culture within an organisation. And it can just be that actually there's a habit that's formed over a period of time that people don't even notice. And it's not until you actually point that habit out that then the change starts to occur, because people go, oh no, I really shouldn't have done that. And then it starts. We've talked about people giving people nicknames and things like that. That's fine as long as that's what that person wants. It's not fine if they don't want it. It's a simple thing, but it can make a huge difference in the office environment.
Absolutely. You brought up the word culture, and one of the first things that I teach is that the executive team, the business owner, the CEO, they are always on stage. They are always being watched. And if they're not behaving the way that they want their team to be behaving, they're not teaching the right concepts. And so we define our core values, but we also relate to the behaviors that they have to live by and behave by every single day to get across to their organization, their customers, their team, to get that culture engaged. Because everybody's watching. If you're not going to do it, they're not going to do it. And that's what they're talking about. Hey, the boss did this. Why should I have to behave that way? The boss isn't. And so we really have to think about culture drives everything. And it's core values plus our behaviors drive culture.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. Completely agree with you. Well, I think you've got your own business, haven't you, in the sense of you are really the business.
Yeah, it's a one-man band effectively, in terms of, I do the selling, I do the customer liaison work, and then there's software developers behind the scenes, but they're not customer facing. So it's interesting to hear the different perspectives, really.
Yeah, it really, the thing I've prided myself on for the last 22 years is I can help anyone who's wanting to make change and wanting to think differently. No matter what your size of business is, no matter what your number of employees are, but I love influencing more people. And that's why I love organizations that you can teach your team one thing and then you implement, and then the organization can make a big change. And that's a real passion of mine, is to help multiple people get that momentum going so we can create massive change.
What do you think's been your favorite memory in terms of the success that you've had working with a client? Is there one that you can tell us a bit of a story about?
I think it comes back to culture. And I've had a lot of family-run businesses. I've had a lot of corporate-run businesses. But my favorite is a family-run business where they actually think it's running as a family, but they're not holding others accountable. They haven't gotten clarity on responsibilities. They're just running it as we're best buds, we're brother, sister, we're mother, son, we're husband, wife, whatever it might be. But once they make that change to running it as a business and really deciding on where we're taking this, what are we trying to create, and what are the rules we're going to live by, what are the ways of working that we're going to play by, then it becomes something amazing. Because if we just run it as, yep, we're family, we're going to let everybody do what they want to do, we're going to let everybody make their own decisions, but we're not clear on where we're headed or why we're doing the things that we're doing, it isn't going to go anywhere. So that's been my biggest enjoyment, is seeing how families can change the way they're working together to really get results. And really make it a business instead of a group of family members trying to make something happen.
I agree. Myself and my husband own a drug and alcohol rehab in one of the local towns, and our daughter works for us as well. And it is very much about, I go to work. If I'm in the office, I am the boss. I'm not mum and I'm not wife. And when we first set up the company, that was one of the things. There has to be one person that carries that responsibility. And of course, it's a big step when your husband decides to come and join the family company, and he's been the breadwinner for the last 20 years or whatever, and then he becomes my employee, for want of a better word. But I think I completely agree with you, that bit about work. It's a company, it's a business, it has to run as a business. Otherwise, it's not about making allowances because it's your daughter or your husband or whatever. You conduct yourselves accordingly to the business that we're in. And it does work, but I'm not always very well liked.
Well, I think that's a great point. When you're running a business, you're leading a business, it's about the bigger picture. And you've got to think of it as, I'm in charge of X number of families getting payroll, X number of families being able to provide for themselves. Yeah. And so we've got to make the right decisions for the bigger picture. And we can't make exceptions just because they're family members or we like this person differently. We've got to make that bigger picture view to make the right decisions for the long term. Yeah. And too many times we're making emotional decisions instead of thinking about, how does this impact us 12 months from now? How does this impact us 3 years from now? And how does it impact all the families that we have working for us? Because that's really what it's about, is how are we ensuring that every employee and their family gets their paycheck, how they're making a living, and that we are responsible for them. It's not just about us as the owners or leaders. We've got to take care of the families that are working within our organization.
Definitely. Well, how do you link people's mental health with that?
I look at it this way. You do have to have balance in life. I hate the word balance because I think there's seasons, not ceilings, seasons of harder work, seasons of lesser work. But we've got to recognize as an organization that it's not always going to be 8 to 5. It's not always going to be working and leaving at the same time. We're going to have seasons where we're working harder. We're going to have seasons when it's not as hard to work. And it's not about balancing what your family life and your work life is. It's about balancing life in general. And I think that's a crazy thing to think about, is we've got to, as an organization, respect that everybody has lives outside of work. We've got to respect that they have other priorities that they need to make sure are making progress, not just work lives. But at the same time, as an employee, I have to recognize my commitment to the organization and what I'm providing to them for the paycheck that they're providing for me. And I think there's a balance of that. It's not just about making sure that everybody's getting equal time in one place or another. It's about what are we getting in return and how are we making a living and a life out of it, not just going to work.
Yeah. Yeah, completely. And getting any balance in any part of your life is so vitally important, isn't it? Not just in your work, it's in your family time, it's in your self-time, that self-care time that we don't always take responsibility for. We can kind of very often dismiss that as not being so important, but in actual fact, it is really important to recharge your batteries. If you don't recharge your batteries, then you struggle. It's interesting in our industry that we spend a lot of time supporting our staff in the sense of they get seen once a month. They have a supervisor once a month. They spend an hour with that person to recharge their batteries, look at any challenges that are there, etc., and then activate and instigate anything that needs to be changed. But a lot of organisations don't take that time to spend with their team in any. So I'm just wondering do you replicate that at all, or do you suggest any of that in your work that you do with people?
Absolutely. I recommend that my clients that are in management positions, including the CEO, including the executive team and mid-level managers, that they have one-on-ones with their direct reports. And a one-on-one isn't just, checking up on projects and how we're making progress. It's checking in on the person. What's working for you? What's not working for you? What can I provide for you that you're not getting? What are your dreams in this position? What are your dreams in the organization? And your role as a manager is to help that team member achieve their objectives. And the more we help our team achieve their objectives, the more as an organization we're going to achieve ours. And I think that's a when companies don't do those one-on-ones or have those conversations, you're really missing out on a number of things. You're missing out on not only helping that individual get better or get them to share more things, but we can learn from them on how do we improve the organization? How do we improve processes? How do we improve relationships? Just by listening and asking the right questions. That I always look at it this way. There's what we do and there's how we do it. And there's so many times we get stuck in what we're doing that we miss the improvements and effectiveness of how we're doing things. And a big part of how we do things is listening, asking the right questions, following up on those responses that we get, and really making a difference in people's lives because of those activities.
And I completely concur with you. I mean, it's an interesting conversation I had this morning purely about the accident book at work. And I know that to some people that's like, oh, well, it's no big deal. But actually it is a big deal. The accident book is a really important part of day-to-day problems. If you've got a problem, you record it. If something's happened, you can then instigate a change. But if somebody doesn't highlight that, then that's well, something awful could happen, and you know the consequences of that can be quite big. But it's also alongside of that, somebody's best friend died, and you wouldn't necessarily know about that unless you spent the hour with that person to find out that their best friend has died. If you don't take the time, you then don't get that time back. And I think people who build relationships with their work manager, whatever you want, whatever their role is, I think it builds businesses. It builds a level of security for the business as well. And I think that's really important. What do you do on your own? I know you've got a guy that does work for you and you've got people in the background, but do you spend time with them on a one-to-one at all?
I try to. I think one of the big challenges is you mentioned about goals and kind of, you know, what are your goals? And you mentioned the family business that, you know, they didn't really have any goals. And I think I've got to a point now where I need to relook at those goals. And that's a really difficult thing to do because, you know, what are your goals? What's achievable? And I think going through schooling here in the UK, you know, you're always taught SMART goals, which are actually what it stands for.
Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bounded.
Thank you. There we go. And you think, well, you know, in my mind, goals are not necessarily achievable because actually I want to push above that ceiling and I want to achieve something more than what's achievable, if that makes sense. And I think it's really hard when you get to a certain point in life where you go, well, what are your goals? What do you want to achieve?
But doesn't that then come back to growth, which is what Monty was saying? It's that bit about you take each bit as a step. There's a step into, isn't there? There's always
there probably is.
Well, you and I both know that that's the case because if you looked at what your goals were 7 years ago and what they are, you've achieved the majority of those already.
I think it's a case of looking at those goals now and looking at, well, you know, what we achieved and now where do we go from here? And I think that's where I've got to, is I'm a bit stuck right now of, you know, what do I want my next goals to be? I've got an idea, but
it's the obstacles that we put in the way, isn't it, Monty, that you start to think, oh, well, you know, I'm never probably going to get that. And it's like, no, hold on a minute, you've got to take the step back, isn't it? It's that step by step rather than looking at this massive great. I mean, if you told me, I don't know, 20 years ago that I was going to be living in the house that I'm living, doing what I'm doing, blah, 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 you would never have thought that. I thought it was achievable.
You know, I really look at it this way. When I work with my clients, I break it down into multiple phases. The first goal I like to talk about is a Jim Collins concept called Big, Hairy, Audacious Goal. It's something that's 10 years or longer out. And so what do you want? The impact. It's not just a measurable or financial number or anything like that. What's the impact that you want to be having on the world in 10 years? And then the second phase is 3 years from now. Where do you want to be in progress to that big, hairy, audacious goal? And then once we have clarity on that, let's break it down to 1 year from now. In order for us to achieve that 3-year benchmark, where do we need to be 1 year from now? And then from that 1 year conversation, we break it down to 90-day increments. So I really believe that 90-day rhythms needs to be a practice in every organization because just as you said, we can set big goals. Yeah, I want to exceed that. But then we have to break it down into what's life really look like to make this happen. and what has to occur in the next 90 days to get closer to it. What has to occur in our decision making, our client acquisition, in our processes, in our recruitment, whatever it is. And 90-day focuses is a great time frame to make a good impact, but it builds momentum. You build that 90-day momentum, then after 90 days, you take a pause, see what progress that we've gained, and then let's set the next 90-day benchmark and continue the momentum. So we ultimately can achieve that 1-year benchmark, and ultimately the 3-year benchmark, and ultimately that longer-term big, hairy, audacious goal. Because it is too easy to say, well, that's a very aggressive goal. We'll see when we get there. No, where do we need to be 12 months from now for us to hit that 3-year benchmark?
Yeah,
because it's about a bigger emotional connection. That's why I said, what's the impact in 10 years that we want to have? How many countries do we want to have business in? How many people do we want to impact? How many lives do we want to impact? And I've got a healthcare client as an organization that I've worked with for a number of years, and their big, hairy, audacious goal is to impact 10,000 people a day.
wow.
And that's a big, hairy, audacious goal. So they start to measure that. So they start to see what actions they're doing. They're at about 3,000 people a day. And so it's how do we need to change things? How do we need to make better decisions? But you've got to start to measure the progress. You've got to start to see what changes are making an impact so we can move closer to that. And that drives them to impact that number of people a day.
But also, it's something that kept coming up in my head as you were talking, and I completely concur with what you're saying, is that bit about what gets in the way. It's recognizing the barriers that we as human beings create to prevent that. If you don't explore that as well, you're never going to get your big, audacious, hairy, whatever, I can't remember what it is now, goal. Because actually, we are human beings and we do sabotage things, but it's recognizing that we're sabotaging, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree.
So, like, it's a bit like you saying, I'd like to have another 10 houses within 10 years or whatever. The fact is, to be able to do that, what is it stopping you from doing that? Not how necessarily just to achieve it. What prevents you from achieving that goal that you want, or your 10,000 people? And it's funny, you said, wow, that's a lot of people. But if you think about what you do for a living, and you probably, your IT business probably hits more than 10,000 people a day.
Probably.
Do you know what I mean?
It's quite scary,
but you
actually.
forget.
Yeah, you do. I think you're absolutely right. Monty, are there particular industries that you work in? Is it any industry? Are there industries you wouldn't work in?
I've for the last 22 years, I think I've touched almost every industry out there.
Wow.
To me, it's not about the industry. It's more about the individuals that I'm working with, and that they want more out of their organization. They want more out of themselves and their team. That's most important to me. I've worked in agriculture. I've worked in manufacturing, service, construction, retail, and every one of them, it's about the individual, helping them see what they want to create. And that's a part of it. You mentioned the obstacles that we're always bringing on ourselves. That's why I love the 90-day sprints, the 90-day focus, because every 90 days we step back and say, what's working, what's holding us back, and what needs to be done in the next 90 days to overcome that. And every industry, no matter what you're in, you've always got challenges, you've always got barriers, because we're always making different decisions, and we need to make different decisions. But when we're intentional, that's my whole goal, is to help people be more intentional in how they think and how they act and how they lead. And I think that routine is really helpful.
Is there an industry that you've worked in that you've found more exciting than others to work in?
I spent 14 years in agriculture, and I grew up on a farm. And for the first few years in business, I stayed away from agriculture. Yeah. And just because I'd had enough for a while, or I was burnt out on it for a while. But it seems like the last number of years, I've gotten back into some agricultural relationships and really enjoyed the conversations. And that history of mine in agriculture has helped with that. And so that's been a big connection of mine. My family still farms here in Iowa. And so I have a lot of connection there.
What kind of farming is that? family does?
Well, they grow corn and soybeans. They used to have hogs, but no more pigs. So just corn and soybeans. But my brother and my father farm together, and my dad's 80 years old and still lives on the farm, and
Wow.
just can't get him off it. He just loves it, and that's what he lives for.
Do you have horses on the farm, on the family farm?
You know, when I grew up as a young kid, I remember having one horse. I remember my dad being raised having a couple horses and him enjoying that. But no horses today, and it's been a long time since they've had horses.
And what about yourself, Monty? You got a family?
I have 3 daughters, 2 grown that have wonderful jobs. They're both data analysts and enjoy numbers, enjoy math. And the youngest daughter is still, she'll be a junior at local university here in Iowa State University. And so they all are doing great. They love working hard, they love learning, and it's fun watching them become adults as well.
Is anybody who else works within your industry, within your job, your company? Is it just you?
In my business, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
I do outsource a number of things. I've got a person that helps me with marketing, person that helps with my books, and a couple people that work with my marketing, I guess. But no direct employees. I have a lot of outsourced people that do different things to help me grow my business. But I service my clients. I do a lot of the sales efforts, but a lot of the back office things I have outsourced, and so I can focus on where I enjoy my time.
Yeah. It's nice to do that way, because then you do what you like, don't you? It's the fun stuff, really.
Absolutely.
And is it just in your local state, the companies you work with, or is it across the US? Is it international?
I've had clients all across the United States. It's been fun. I get referrals, some of my marketing. I launched a book 7 years ago, and so that's gained me some clients around the country. But it's really expanded because of relationships and results. And so every 90 days, no matter where my clients are located, I go visit them and their executive team for a planning day to plan that next 90-day sprint. And that gives me a chance to see their organizations, to meet their team, and become part of their organization. And that's really how I view it. I become part of their team.
Yeah.
And that's the fun part.
So what's your book called?
Pulling Profits Out of a Hat.
Really?
Okay.
And is it on Audible?
Yes, it is.
That's all right. I'm just looking now.
I'm going to go on to Amazon and get that ordered, I feel. Go and have a look.
How many books have you written?
Just the one.
Pulling Profits
Out of a hat.
Out of the Hat.
I found it.
I've got it as well. There you go. I've downloaded it as we speak.
Amazing.
Awesome.
I'm going to order the
Sorry, I've just
hardcover
gotta-
because I don't, even though I'm the younger, more technical one, I don't do virtual book or audio books. It's got to be a physical book.
What I do is I listen to them, and if they've really, really sparked I then go and buy the hard copy. So I do
really?
it, yeah, because I like the physical. I like the touch of a book. I think it's just. But all of my books are in the library at work, so I'm feeling deprived of books in my home. So I'm going to start buying some more just for the house, because I think it's.
I think that's a good idea. Monty, what are your I don't know, top 2 or 3 business books that you've read?
You know, I look at it as really more about the author than the book. I have a lot of authors that I follow, that I teach from. When I think of leadership, I think of John Maxwell. Okay. He's got a number of different topics in dozens of books that he's written that really go deep into relationships or connecting or building trust or working with people to get the best out of people. So when I think of leadership, I think of John Maxwell. When I think of a strategy, I think of Jim Collins. He's got a number of different books that he talks about how to grow a business, how to build the momentum, how to build a culture. And so a lot of different things that I do go off of those 2 organizations or those 2 authors, but I'm always reading new different things. I read a lot of Harvard Business Review because there's a lot of great authors, a lot of great articles that really touch on what today's leaders need to be thinking about or acting on. So that's a powerful resource as well.
Sounds good.
It's interesting because I read a lot of American kind of cultural books around business and motivation. One of mine is Split the Difference, which is I can't even remember the guy's name. I'm rubbish at remembering people's names. But it's a really interesting book. But the therapy books, I think one of the people that I think inspired me the most was Yalom. He's, I don't even know if he's still alive now, to be honest. He's quite an old man if he is. But he's just listening to, because he's written so many books, and a lot of it touches on that personal relationship with people and the value of that personal relationship. And I think it really parallels with the business world as well, that very often the business books they don't always float my boat, if you see what I'm saying. They don't always hold my attention enough, because they don't talk enough about the relationship with the individual or the organisation or the outside world or the wider community, as you see. And I think sometimes I just miss that when I read some of these business books. They're almost detached from them, but some of them I love them. I listen to books every day. I don't go by a day without listening to a book at all. I feel if I don't get my fix, it's like my drug. You don't read much, do you?
I do, but I go through phases of reading. So I'll read a book, and then I've got this awful habit. Once I've read that book, I feel that sense of accomplishment, and I go and I'm like, I'll have a break now. And then that break could turn into a year before I pick up a book again.
Oh my gosh.
Which is terrible. But I have just got back reading, actually. I'm reading a book at the moment.
What are you reading?
It's a law book. So, yeah. What about you, Monty? What are you reading at the moment?
I'm reading on emotional intelligence.
Right.
And, yes, and it's always interesting when I read a book, I start talking about the concepts with my clients, and so maybe it's the law of attraction or whatever, but a lot of my clients, I have those conversations around emotional intelligence, on recognizing our own emotions, how it impacts others, recognizing emotions of those that we're interacting with, and how we should adapt and understand and have empathy. And so that's really a great concept that I think is powerful. And when I read a book like that, I start to implement it with my clients, because it's all about people. Business is all about people. There's so much talk about artificial intelligence today, but I think the more we understand about people, the more successful we will be. And that's a powerful concept.
I think that bit about you just touched on AI. We were recording with somebody else earlier, and they were talking about it. But the thing is people don't realize that AI is brought on by people. It's our knowledge that we're putting into AI that's creating AI. So I think there's a big value in that. But also alongside that, I completely agree with you. There's a great book called Emotional Sobriety that I've read numerous times. That's a really good one to look at how you transform your emotional journey into a level of growth, because very often we forget in business as well that actually the emotional growth is as important as those professional tools. If it is a professional tool in its own right. So yeah, I've also read a book called Emotional Intelligence. I don't know if it's the same one that you have, but yeah, it's great. I love it. And also, you can't be a leader if you're falling apart at the seams. It's just impossible. Or you're sticking stuff up your nose or in your arm or whatever. It's just impossible to do that.
Absolutely.
And produce a healthy team. It's not, you're not able to do it. So what do you do, Mike, in the sense of, because I know you've got some people that work for you, but I'm just wondering, what do you do in the sense of burnout for yourself?
Oh, that's a very good question. I'm not sure I've got an answer for that one. What about you, Monty? Let's hear you first.
You really skipped that question.
I have, yeah. I'm deflecting that one.
I know why as well.
I think it's always about finding things you enjoy. And I love live music. I love hanging out with my daughters. I love to go for car cruises. And it's just making time to do something that gives you that relaxed feeling, or gives you a feeling of wonder or a feeling of enjoyment. And you got to do something every day to do that, to give you that feeling, because that's what helps you get through the rough times. You need that downtime. You need something else outside of work that gives you an inspiration and drive and relaxation. And so yeah, I love going to concerts and live music just to enjoy the world, and go for drives out in the open air. And so little things like that.
So what car do you drive?
Well, I have two fun cars. I have a 1966 Plymouth convertible. It's a huge boat. I've had it for 33 years, something like that, 34 years. And Just love the sound of it. It's been with me living across a number of different locations and been in a number of states, and my kids love to go for rides in it as well. So that's a big car that I love to drive. And then I've got a three-wheel vehicle called a Slingshot. It's got two wheels in front and one in the back. It's a two-seater, no doors, no windows. It's street drivable, and it's like I'm in high school again. It's got a great big stereo, loudspeakers, and just a lot of fun.
We've just Googled
We
it
just
just to
Googled
see,
them.
and yes, yeah, it looked like good fun. What's your daily car then?
My David car is just an SUV.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I've got a '64 Mustang, so yeah, very similar to the Plymouth. Do you work on your car yourself, or do you send it to the garage?
I send it to the garage. I know how to drive it. I know how to make sure I maintain it by taking it to the garage in timely fashion. But I have someone else do all the work.
Amazing, amazing. Sounds
Well, I
good.
have 4 horses. That's my cars. Which is why I was thinking, I wonder if I could get a cheap holiday in America on horses if your farm does. I'm always thinking like that because it's like I love going abroad and riding. It's just good fun.
So, Monty, I'm curious. So, obviously, a big part of your job is helping people with their goals and their growing of their business and things like that. How do you do that for yourself? What are your goals? How do you manage your goals? How do you manage your growth?
It's a challenge, as you talked about, because as a single person business, and that's what I've always decided, that I wanted to have my own practice. I want to have that flexibility and drive. My goal is to take care of my family and take care of their weddings, their college, things like that. But I also want to enjoy the finer things in life. So in order to do that, I've got to work. I've got to have a certain level of income. I want to travel. So I've got to have goals around travel, how much time I'm going to spend traveling. And so I set revenue targets so I can do those things. I really believe that your personal goals should drive your business goals. And so I set some personal goals of what I want to achieve each year, and then that determines what I want to do as a business, of what income that I need to achieve those things. And that's how I identify the number of people that I want to influence or the impact that I want to have on the communities that I'm a part of. And so I'm always wanting to travel, always want to go to concerts, spend time with my family. I've taken my daughters to New York City and done different things like that, and great family time, which I love to do, and that really drives me, is those personal goals.
Amazing. That sounds yeah, really, really good.
And it is, I mean, I know you don't have your own children, do you yet? That'll come.
But you question that.
But it is that bit, isn't it? I know for me, it's like, I know this sounds crazy, but I like to see my grandchildren at least once a week or have some form of contact with them once a week. That just is nice. I love to speak to my kids. I speak to my kids every day. There's not a day goes by when I don't speak to them. And even because William, my youngest, works in America a lot. He's there and that at the moment. I don't know where he is. Oh, he's in LA at the moment. So, and I think that just those small goals. My other goals are that my husband does the jobs around the house that have been hanging around for longer than 3 to 6 months. And I do keep teasing him about it because he gets distracted and does other things. He's really good. He's brilliant like that. But either way, I've got holes in my ceiling and various other walls we've moved into a new house, so that's why. But those kind of things, I like to achieve them. I'd like him to achieve them, but I can't force him to do them. But it's something that I hold on my goals. What are yours?
My goals?
Yeah.
I need to work on that.
I know you do.
Yeah, that's probably a conversation for another day.
I think it's something that start with short-term goals, and really thinking about, again, going to that 90-day sprint. Where do I want to be 90 days from now? What do I want to experience in the next 90 days? In life, in business, how many people do I want to influence? And what do I have to do to get there? And start with a short-term goal like that and build some energy around getting some short-term wins. Because when you start to get some short-term wins, you build momentum. You get excited about what you can accomplish. That, hey, I did this. I can do more. And then after that, you can set your next 90 days. Or then you can think bigger. Well, God, I did this in 90 days. What can I do in 12 months? And so if you've not done well at setting goals in the past, start with a short-term benchmark. and really work towards that. And make it one thing. What's one thing I want to accomplish in 90 days, and I'm gonna put effort into it, and it's got to be something I'm excited about, something that's going to make an impact, something that is going to be lasting, something that I can be really proud of, and then build off of that momentum.
But also, I think you've got to own that to a certain degree. You've got to have a level of ownership. If you don't own that, and also is not balk at the cost it may be to you, if you see what I'm saying, both financially, physically, and emotionally. It's about, if you really, really want that enough, you will do everything to go to get that. If you see, it's a bit like paying for therapy. You know, I there's no cost. I would always pay for therapy. I'd never waited for the NHS or anybody else. My therapy was, I spend, and still do it now. Therapy gets paid every month. That's my goal, and that's what I do. But I think you have to invest in yourself. And if you don't invest in yourself, then those 90-day goals, as you're suggesting, get lost because I either don't want to spend the money, or I don't want to do this, or you start to put those obstacles in the way, and they do get in the way, and then you end up not growing. That's a lecture over, Mike.
So Monty, what does the rest of your day look like today? What have you got on?
Well, I've got a couple client calls, and a lot of my client calls are with the executive team. So my next call is with a CEO of an organization and their management team, and we're talking about their culture. And so we're actually going to create their core values, or get a good start on it, in today's coaching session. And they're located in the Northeast of the United States, and so my only relationship with them at this point is by video call like this, but it's with their executive team, and that's when we make the biggest impact. And why I like working with executive teams like that is to get alignment. And that's one of my biggest phrases is, if we're not aligned, we can't move forward. And so one thing I'd love to offer to your audience is an online alignment assessment to see how an executive team or organization is aligned on the right things. So if you go to coachmonty.com/podcast, you can download a assessment to see how aligned your team is, to help identify actions that need to be taken. So coachmonty.com/podcast, and it's a great way to see how aligned people are. And that's always the first step in growing an organization is alignment. We have to agree on where we're headed, what we're willing to do, what we're willing to behave as, what our values are, what our culture is, and how we communicate with each other. So that's a great starting point.
Well, I'm really conscious of the time. Is there anything else that you wanted to add, or you wanted to share on this?
I look at it this way. I help every business. I can help every business on the face of the earth if someone wants to grow and change. And it's about a process that I follow. And my book, Pulling Profits Out of a Hat, really walks through the process of 5 disciplines. And the 5 disciplines are something that every organization needs to be focused on. It's not about a person, it's about the discipline of the organization. And the 5 disciplines are: number 1, strategy. What's our strategy of how we're going to win? You got to have a discipline around and staying focused on that. The second discipline is business development. How are we going to grow the business? How are we going to do marketing, sales, customer service? The third discipline is people. People are so important to an organization. We have to have discipline around them itself. It's how are we developing leaders? How are we recruiting? How are we training? The fourth discipline is execution. How do we implement? How do we make sure that we have 90-day sprints and rhythms? How do we ensure that we have our financials in place? How do we have our processes in place to get things consistent and accomplished? And then the fifth discipline is mission. I'm not talking about a mission statement here. I'm talking about who we are and what we love to do and how we behave with each other. That's a discipline of mission. And that's got to be a foundation of what we're building and where we're headed. And I truly believe, after 20 plus years of working with organizations, these are the 5 disciplines that help get a business, no matter what your size, doing the right things every single day, no matter who the leader or manager is. And that's what I love to instill is we lead people, we manage processes. And we've got to lead our team to the future, but we've got to manage our business in a fashion so it can continuously grow and support our team and organization.
Brilliant. Can you come and live with me, please? Dave might have something to say about that, but you know, I like how you talk.
Yeah, me too. No, that's brilliant.
Really
Well, thank you so
lovely.
much for coming on, Monty. It's been great. And we'd love to have you back perhaps in 6 months' time and kind of talk about some of this stuff again. I think it would be really valuable.
That sounds wonderful. I'd love to do that.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Monty. Much appreciate it. If you could just stay online